Hola, soy Pachi Valencia y bienvenidos a Desde el Capitolio, el espacio donde analizamos las políticas que impactan a la comunidad hispana en Estados Unidos. Durante la CPAC tuvimos la oportunidad de conversar con Mike Davis, presidente y fundador del Article 3 Project, una de las voces más activas en la lucha contra la censura tecnológica. En esta entrevista, Davis explica cómo la gran tecnología ha acumulado un poder sin precedentes, qué está haciendo el Congreso para enfrentarlo y por qué considera que la censura en redes sociales afecta directamente a la libertad de expresión y la competencia en el mercado. Además, hablamos sobre las medidas que propone su organización para frenar el dominio de gigantes como Google, Facebook y Amazon y cómo esto podría cambiar con una nueva administración. Escuchemos. Mike Davis, president and founder of Article 3 Project. Thank you so much for joining Desde el Capitolio here at the CPAC.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Mike, you've been a leading voice against tech censorship. So how would you describe the current landscape, either on the legislative side of the tech censorship right now?
I think what you're going to see with President Trump's appointments of Andrew Ferguson to chair the Federal Trade Commission, along with Gail Slater to head the antitrust division in the Trump 47 Justice Department, you're going to see a bipartisan antitrust enforcement renaissance that started under President Trump in his first term. It's just about the only thing that President Biden has done right is continuing President Trump's antitrust enforcement against big tech, and you're going to see that ramp up under Gail Slater and Andrew Ferguson, and that is a good thing. And I'll tell you just one example about censorship. If Google competed against YouTube instead of acquired YouTube, Google would not be censoring Americans. They would be trying to compete for those Americans. They wouldn't try to deplatform conservatives and others with whom they disagree. And this is why our antitrust law enforcement is so critically important. These laws have been on the books for 100 years, like the Sherman Act, and the whole point of these is to protect the free market. The free market requires a functioning market. When you have trillion-dollar big tech monopolists like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple using their market power to crush competition, shutter small businesses and cancel conservatives and others with whom they disagree, we no longer have a functioning market. We no longer have a free market.
Mm-hmm. So what are the steps that from the Congress they're taking to do this? Is there any special bill that has been advocating for the tech regulation?
Well, antitrust is the opposite of regulation. It's law enforcement. You're targeting the anti-competitive tumors on the free market, so you don't need industry-wide regulations. You saw Facebook actually calling for regulations. Of course they are, because they're a trillion-dollar company and they can afford those regulations, but they're entry barriers to start up competitors. And I would say this with Facebook. If Facebook competed against Instagram, for example, instead of acquiring Instagram, they wouldn't be censoring Americans. We need to break up these trillion-dollar big tech platforms, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, so we can restore the free market to the tech industry.
Mm-hmm. So there's been always this saying that the tech companies also need to moderate the content there. So how will the balance be between content moderation versus because of combating misinformation, maybe against what the tech censorship actually is?
We don't need these trillion-dollar big tech platforms to be arbiters of truth. We don't need them to combat misinformation. People said that, especially during COVID, that a lot of these scientists were deplatformed. A lot of these doctors were deplatformed because they said they were spreading COVID misinformation, and those doctors and scientists ended up being correct. For example, on the cloth mask mandate. Cloth masks do not work. They don't stop the spread of COVID. And the 6-foot rule was completely made up, right? It was an arbitrary rule. But think about between the 6-foot rule for COVID that doesn't stop COVID or the mask mandate that doesn't stop COVID. Just think about how much disruption we had to our lives because of the cloth mask mandate and the 6-foot rule. If we actually had a debate, a scientific debate on this, instead of censoring under the guise of protecting Americans from misinformation, maybe we wouldn't have had so much disruption in our lives. Maybe we wouldn't have had people locked down, kids locked out of schools to appease the teachers' unions, and we wouldn't have had our elderly family members die alone because of these arbitrary, science-free, mindless mandates. We don't need big tech. We don't need the government protecting us from a debate under the guise of misinformation. We should let the battle of ideas play out, and then that's how we get to the truth.
Do you think from the Hispanic community perspective, is there any topic or specific tech censorship that you have seen throughout these years?
Well, I mean, Hispanics are like all other Americans, right? This affects them. I mean, I know from going to a Catholic school with a lot of Hispanics when I was growing up, including my nephews and nieces who are Hispanic. We have conservative values. We have Christian values. And if you have these big tech platforms censoring us because we don't agree with woke ideology, we don't think that, for example, boys should play in girls' sports or men should be in women's locker rooms, that would get us censored under the old regime. And so I think that Hispanics have American values, and the censorship that we see from these big tech platforms, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, are Chinese values.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the panel you'll be participating at CPAC will be about? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, it's about that. I'm going to be on there with Senator Eric Schmidt and another panelist. Eric Schmidt's the all-star senator from Missouri, and we're going to be talking about big tech. We're going to be talking about what we can do to break them up, and so they don't have gatekeeping power over information and commerce. We don't want them destroying small businesses. We don't want them destroying free speech. And it's time for our antitrust law enforcers with FTC Chairman Andrew Ferguson and soon-to-be antitrust Assistant Attorney General Gail Slater coming together and breaking up these trillion-dollar big tech platforms that crush competition, shutter small businesses, and cancel those with whom they disagree. That's unacceptable. It's un-American. Those are CCP values, and we don't want them in America.
Yes, now that you mentioned CCP values, which is the communist regime in China, how have you maybe you've seen the development or how the free speech has transformed through the years. What's your perspective about it?
I think it was shocking after BLM riots and COVID lockdowns how China was able to bring their CCP censorship to the United States, and they use these trillion-dollar big tech platforms. They use Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple because those trillion-dollar platforms want to do business in China, so they take the CCP's marching orders on censorship, and that is unacceptable in America. We don't want CCP values in America. We don't want censorship. We don't want COVID lockdowns. We don't want their social credit. They can keep their barcodes in China. We don't want them in America.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Trump and maybe a consensus, let's call it that way, because the CEO of Amazon, CEO of Google went to the inauguration of Trump. So what message does that send to the American people?
I would say to these trillion-dollar big tech monopolists, thank you for paying for our inauguration. It was a fun party, but you're not going to have antitrust amnesty under Andrew Ferguson and Gail Slater. And I would just remind people that Facebook, for example, spent $400 million in 2020 to chase President Trump out of office. They donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration this time. I think they spent 400 to 1 that they spent against President Trump. They have a lot of catching up to do, but it's not going to work. President Trump's eyes are wide open. That's very clear through his appointments of Andrew Ferguson and Gail Slater. And I would say to the big tech monopolist, this antitrust, bipartisan antitrust renaissance is not going to turn out well for Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple.
But so, what would the solution be of regulating these tech companies? So, what they are advocating for, or what is your organization advocating for?
We don't want regulation. We want to break them up. We want Google to compete against YouTube. We want Facebook to compete against Instagram. We want to break up Google's online advertising monopoly that's the lifeblood for their censorship and their other woke ideology. We want to break up their search monopoly on Google search. We want functioning markets with tech, and so it's not these trillion-dollar monopolists who control everything and do the CCP's bidding.
Do you think it's easy to do? Like, how long would it take?
It's not going to be easy to do. These antitrust enforcement matters take years and years and years, but it's so important that we do it. It already started under President Trump 4 years ago. To Biden's credit, he's continued this antitrust enforcement for the last 4 years. We are at the remedies phase against Google in one of these court cases, and I think that what this judge Mehta needs to do is we need to break up Google. We need to break up their online advertising monopoly. We need to break up their search monopoly.
Okay. Is there any specific message that you would like to send to the Hispanic community about this topic?
I think that to the Hispanic community, just like all Americans, President Trump is your champion. He cares about you. He cares about your family. He cares about your well-being. He cares about your safety. He cares about your future. He cares about all Americans, and you're seeing this particularly with his immigration enforcement. Who the hell wants Tren de Agua, violent Venezuelan gangs in their neighborhoods? They're not going into fancy neighborhoods like Georgetown or Martha's Vineyard. Pardon me, they're going in to working class neighborhoods, the neighborhoods where I grew up, right? They're going in to those neighborhoods where you have working class Americans, including Hispanic Americans, who have to deal with this violence, who have to deal with this crime, who have to deal with this mayhem. And President Trump is saying that's not going to happen under his watch. There's a new sheriff in town.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mike Davis, for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Hope this is not the last time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Una conversación muy interesante con Mike Davis sobre la censura tecnológica, el poder de las grandes empresas y el impacto que esto tiene en la libertad de expresión. Pero ahora quiero saber su opinión. ¿Cree que estas compañías realmente están afectando el libre mercado y la libertad de expresión? ¿Y cómo ha impactado la censura tecnológica en su vida o en la información que consume? Déjeme sus comentarios debajo porque queremos saber su perspectiva. Y si le gustó esta conversación, no olvide darle like, compartir y suscribirse a Desde el Capitolio para más entrevistas exclusivas desde Washington, D.C. durante la CPAC 2025. Nos vemos en el próximo episodio. Yo soy Pachi Valencia. Hasta pronto.